By the early 1980s, there was still room in adult cinema for films that slipped between categories, movies that were not afraid to push the boundaries of the genre and were willing to take risks in the belief that audiences would join them for the ride. Nightdreams arrived in that liminal space, not quite narrative cinema, not quite gallery installation, not quite parody, not quite pornography. It played like a secret passed between insomniacs. A midnight attraction that felt less watched than experienced. The premise is deceptively simple. A woman named Mrs. Van Houten is inside a laboratory, wired into a dream experiment. Scientists observe as fantasies are induced and recorded. From there, the film fractures into a series of dream vignettes, each with its own internal logic, visual grammar, and emotional temperature. Scenes jump from one dream scenario to the next without explanation. Humor rubs up against menace. Eroticism slides into grotesquerie and back again. The story, such as it is, exists only to justify the next descent. Behind this strange architecture was Francis Delia, credited as FX Pope. His approach to filmmaking was closer to mood engineering than traditional direction, and it is no surprise that he went on to a successful career directing music videos. Throughout the 1980s, Delia shoots Nightdreams in a way that emphasizes the otherworldliness. Soft focus, shadow-heavy lighting, lingering camera movements that drift instead of cut. Where most mature films of the period framed bodies functionally, Delia frames them like an art installation. The camera seems less interested in anatomy than in atmosphere. That atmosphere didn't emerge accidentally. Jerry Stahl and Stephen Sayadian wrote the script credited as Herbert Day and Rinse Dream, respectively. It was a pairing that gave Nightdream its unusual sense of intention. Stahl brought a sharp, satirical eye shaped by magazine writing and cultural observation, while Sayadian approached the film as a designer might approach a campaign. Concept first, image-driven, unapologetically artificial. Their script doesn't attempt to disguise the film's episodic nature. Instead, it leans into it. Each fantasy sequence functions as a short film, a themed number in a perverse review. Genre content becomes the delivery system for ideas, parody and pop art exaggeration, and a running sense that modern desire is already absurd before anyone removes their clothes. Sayadian's influence extends beyond the page. His background in graphic design and art direction shows in the film's obsession with surfaces, costumes, and iconography. Even when the film dips into explicit territory, it never quite loses the sense that it's winking at its own construction. The cast is deployed to impressive effect within this framework. At the center of Nightdreams is Dorothy LeMay, whose performance as Mrs. Van Houten anchors the film's drifting abstractions. LeMay was already known for her alternative spark, and Nightdreams exploits that quality by placing her in a role that allows for her more unhinged screen presence to shine. She is the subject of observation, the body upon which experiments are conducted, and her performance is truly unsettling in places. LeMay brings a genuine ferocity that gives the framing device its eerie credibility. Around her, the supporting cast operates less as conventional characters and more as embodiments of tone, genre, and sensation. Lonnie Sanders as the demon slave, for example, carries an otherworldly quality that fits perfectly within the film's surreal register. With minimum dialogue and the use of a prop, her role leads to one of the film's most memorable scenes. Jacqueline Lorians contributes a different energy as one of the cowgirls in an ensemble sequence that delivers. Jennifer West and Andy Nichols provide breaks in the surrealist imagery as the doctors conducting the study, while the male performers, including figures like Ken Starbuck as the Devil and Kevin James as the Heaven Man, are used sparingly and purposefully. They function less as physical partners and more as props or provocateurs, extensions of the environments they inhabit. The relative anonymity of these supporting roles works in the film's favor, allowing them to dissolve into the fantasy architecture rather than drawing attention away from it. This reinforces the central idea that Nightdreams is not about interpersonal chemistry, but about sensation, image, and concept. Collectively, the cast understands the assignment. No one is chasing realism or emotional arcs. Instead, they submit to the film's design, becoming living components of a larger aesthetic experiment. Despite its ambition, Nightdreams was made on a modest budget, assembled through independent financing led by Rinse Dream. Constraints became part of the aesthetic. Fantasy-based interiors dominate, both as part of the narrative construct and because they allowed the filmmakers to control texture and light. Locations feel sealed off from the outside world, detached from geography. Even when a vignette gestures towards a recognizable setting, it plays like a theatrical abstraction of that place. The film doesn't want realism, it wants containment. Sound and music deepen that containment. The soundtrack pulses with early 1980s energy, featuring contributions from Wall of Voodoo and Mitchell Froom. The sound design also emphasizes claustrophobia, the slow thud of a heartbeat, and the amplified sounds of heavy breathing permeate the film. Culturally, Nightdreams feels informed by the success of midnight movies that proved audiences were willing to follow filmmakers into uncomfortable, abstract territory. In my humble opinion, the lingering influence of David Lynch's Eraserhead is evident, not as a template, but as a kind of permission slip. That film's slow-burn underground reputation demonstrated that mood, repetition, and dream logic could sustain attention without conventional storytelling. Nightdreams operates in a similar psychological register, using discomfort and absurdity as connective tissue. What makes Nightdreams endure is not simply that it's strange, but that its strangeness is so deliberate. Every element points in the same direction, away from realism, away from narrative comfort, towards something closer to an erotic art object. It doesn't try to justify itself, and it doesn't soften its edges. Instead, it exists as a record of a moment when adult filmmaking briefly aligned with underground art instincts, when limited resources and big ideas collided in the dark. Decades later, Nightdreams remains difficult to categorize and easy to recognize. It doesn't behave like a curiosity or a novelty. It behaves like a film that knew exactly what it was doing, even if it never fully explains itself. That refusal to explain may be its most enduring quality of all.